Hi VC. Yeah, Dave back with you again, and a recent updates video, which I had been meaning to do for ages, but it got sidelined because of those amazing charity shop finds which I made over the weekend, which my last two videos were about. Yeah, I'm going to cover stuff from basically from since the start of the year, so start of January. Yes, and starting off with again some amazing VCLT from Ben Costello. Ben just managed to find the most incredible stuff up in Limerick, in the fair, in the local fair up there. Yeah, he gave me some last time I met him, which I think was beginning of January, and he gave me some amazing stuff. So three vinyl pieces, starting off with this 12-inch, and this was something I'd been looking out for. David Sylvian, with the late Holger Zuke, John Hassler, and Steve Jansen, and this is Words with the Shaman, 12-inch from 1985. Absolutely amazing track, this. Yeah, yeah, just Sylvian and Zuke and Hassel, you know, superb collaboration. Yeah, brilliant ambient piece. Yeah, Ben managed to track this down at his local fair, so really I'm grateful to him for this. He also gave me this. This is a solo mini album from Mark Almond of Soft Cell. I think this also came out in 1980. Yeah, it came out in '86 on Virgin as well. Yeah, mini album. There's a there's a cover of a track, "The Plague," from Scott Walker, which is from Scott 4. So I think is it from Scott 4? I think so. Anyway, yeah, yeah, really like Mark Almond's solo stuff, and yeah, this has got that kind of you know, that strong kind of Scott Walker influence running through with so many other influences, and yeah, it's a great mini album. A Woman's Story, it's called. And yeah, and the next one is kind of an unusual one. It's very unexpected. This is by an artist who I've seen people show his stuff, probably his earlier stuff on the VC. Milton Nascimento, who is a Brazilian. This is from 1985. This album is called Encontro e Despedidas, which is Portuguese. Actually, I suppose I should have done my research. I actually do not know what that means. I should have looked that up, I suppose, before I shot the video. This is actually a Brazilian pressing. Berkeley is the name of the label. Yeah, I know the name. I've seen his stuff shown, but oh yeah, there's also this very interesting poster. It's worth showing. Fold out poster there. Yeah, an artist whose name I'm kind of familiar with from being shown on the VC, but never really kind of listened to his stuff. So, yeah, it's kind of a Latin fusion kind of thing going through it. Oh, what's his name? Oh yeah, Pat Mahini is actually plays on one of the tracks. Viro e Corte. So Pat Mahini, who featured very heavily in the in that big haul that I made. And Ben, I have something for you from that haul next time we meet. So along with some other stuff, but yeah, very very interesting. It's one I think I have to maybe give another listen to before I kind of make my mind up on it. It's quite interesting. Yeah, Ben also gave me a couple of cassettes. Oh, including this is something he found in a charity shop, but this is Neil Young Trans. Trans. That's album he brought out in 1982, which I think probably divided quite a lot of people. I'd say a lot of his fans were kind of not quite expecting this, but I quite like this album. It's got a quirky kind of entry and a kind of, you know, his take on early 80s synth pop. I love the cover as well, although on this it's kind of maybe not, yeah, it's very much kind of shrunk on this cover, but funnily enough, this is a bootleg cassette from Singapore, and Ben was pointing out this as well. They've labelled it as country, which is kind of funny, and there's a label called UFO, but they seem to be ripping off the Deutsche Grammophon logo there. So, but yeah, I do like I do have a soft spot for this album. I know it's probably a lot of it's quite divisive, I think, among Neil Young fans. But yeah, he also gave me these 3 cassettes, Bob Dylan cassettes. Shot of Love, which is yeah, that's one of his Christian album trilogy. I think it's the last one, isn't it? From 81. And Under the Red Sky, which is from 1990. And I think my personal favourite of the 3 is World Gone Wrong from 1993, where he covers blues standards. It's entirely cover. I think it's pretty much all cover songs on this one. So thanks very much for that, Ben. I met up with Ben at a record fair here in town. Yeah, before I show you what I picked up there, this is another thrift or charity shop find, which I made about a month or so ago. Frank Zappa, You Can't Do That on Stage, Volume 4. Very unusual to find Zappa in charity shops, even on CD. So this is quite a welcome find. It's a double CD live album. It's pretty much a mishmash of live performances, stretching from the 70s right through to the 80s. This was released in 1995 on a label. Oh yeah, it is on his label, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, very pleased to find that. As I said, you don't tend to come across Zappa in the charity shops too often. Oh yes, sorry. There's 2 other things before I get into the CDs. I picked up both of these at different points in the same second-hand record store. First off, this needs no introduction. You all know that cover. Blue Train, John Coltrane from 1959. This is a reissue on Blue Note from I think from the mid-70s, 76 I think, 76 or 77. Originally came out in 1959 I think, and it was kind of it's kind of the before he really kind of went into this kind of more experimental free jazz phase. So it's still very much that kind of bop, post bop thing. So yeah, a classic album that I think I'm sure you're all very familiar with it, or most of you have it in your collection already. But paid €15 for it. It's okay, I suppose, probably about kind of what you'd expect to pay for it. Yeah, not an original, obviously, but still nice to have that in the collection. In the same shop, at a different time, I picked this up. And some of you may recall a couple of videos ago I showed an album by a band called Jesus, what the hell? Oh shit. Anyway, okay. Yes, this is an album which came out on an Irish label called Mulligan. A label which was active from about 1975 to the early 80s. This is a one-off album which is kind of, I suppose you could call it kind of a Irish folk supergroup. Basically, kind of a lot of people like Donal Lunny and so on came together to make this album. It was released in 1977, and kind of Irish folk crossed with a bit of a bluegrass. Bit of a bluegrass influence in there as well. Kind of intriguing artwork as well. I'm not 100% sure what it's supposed to represent, but I wonder, is this a kind of well, I don't know if anybody knows this. There's the polar bear. It's very hard to spot him actually, but there he is. It looks almost like for well, not global warming, but maybe some kind of weird extreme weather. You can see the sun there, and there's I presume it's the Kremlin, and then there's there's all kind of crazy stuff going on. But yeah, a hard enough album to find. It's one I've been on the lookout for a long time. Okay. Finally, I'm going to finish with when I last met Ben. It was at a record fair here in Cork. I ended up not buying any vinyl, but I did grab a big bunch of CDs, mostly industrial, in the industrial music genre. Now they're from the same seller whom I previously bought a lot of similar stuff, and which I showed a couple of videos ago. Starting off with Einstürzende Neubauten. This is their debut album, which originally came out in 1981. This is a late 80s CD reissue. This is called Collapse. Yeah, this is very much kind of yeah, they use a lot of things like heavy use of percussion, kind of homemade percussion, things like they use kind of metal found objects, and created this kind of grinding, pounding industrial music. Yeah, quite intense album. Two pickups by Throbbing Gristle, the originators of the industrial music genre, and the band who gave that genre its name. This is simply called CD1, and this is a posthumous release which came out in 1986, 5 years after they split up. This was recorded in 1979. There's numerous recordings, and many of these recordings were released posthumously after. It's kind of basically consisting of kind of jam sessions. Some of these tracks sound vaguely familiar, like they may have been kind of early versions of tracks which ended up on some of the albums, but in particular 20 Jazz Funk Greats, which came out in '79 as well. But sorry, and yeah, sorry. Okay. Another release by Throbbing Gristle, and this is one that I've been looking out for quite a long time. Again, this was another posthumous release. This was actually originally released after they'd split up. Throbbing Gristle's soundtrack to Derek Jarman's film In the Shadow of the Sun. This originally came out in 1984. This is a CD reissue on Mute from 1993. So this is an entirely instrumental, kind of dark ambient soundtrack, very long and spacey, kind of like a darker version of what Tangerine Dream were doing in the 70s. It really does kind of have the influence of Chris Carter on it, who Chris Carter was quite strongly influenced by Tangerine Dream. Two by Cabaret Voltaire. Their second album, The Voice of America, which came out in 1980 originally. This is a 1990 reissue on Mute, and interestingly, it also has some comes with some stickers. Yeah, so this album, the kind of theme of it uses I think they recorded this album after they had toured America, and it's kind of based on a lot of the kind of Christian fundamentalist radio and so on that they kind of encountered, that are kind of inspired by that kind of side of America. And there's some samples as well, which is kind of interesting because this came out a year before Eno and Brian Eno and David Byrne's My Life in the Bush of Ghosts. But it kind of a slightly similar influence, but I suppose not used quite the same, not used quite effectively, but there is a kind of a similar thing going on in this album. Cabaret Voltaire, The Voice of America, and another one from Cabaret Voltaire, Red Mecca. This came out the following year, 1981. Again, this is a reissue on Mute from 1990. This kind of covered similar themes, but kind of focusing more on, whereas this kind of focused on Christian fundamentalism, this focused on the kind of what was then the kind of emerging Islamic fundamentalism from Iran and so on. So two quite interesting releases from Cabaret Voltaire. This is from the Haffler Trio, and this is called 4 Ways of Saying 5, which came out 1986. The Haffler Trio, despite the name, it's basically just one guy. What was his name? Rather? Yeah, name just escapes me just now. Yeah, basically, kind of more of a sound art act rather than kind of out and out industrial. There's 2 long tracks on this, one of which is kind of largely spoken word, and kind of in the form of a lecture almost. Very interesting listen. The Haffler Trio. And this also came out on this is also on the Mute the Grey Area, which reissued a lot of these and still continues to reissue a lot of the original industrial releases. This is something which I'd been looking out for. I would prefer to pick this up on vinyl, but I'm happy enough to have it on CD. Public Image Limited, The Flowers of Romance. PIL, Public Image Limited, John Lydon and Co. Bassist Jah Wobble had left at this stage. This came out in 1981 originally. So the Jah Wobble's very distinctive bass, which was kind of very much part of the early Pill sound, is missing from this, but they compensate with a very interesting use of percussion, which really creates a kind of very intense atmosphere on this album. Flowers of Romance from Public Image Limited. Finally, this CD by a group which came out on the Warp label in 1999. This is Played. This is kind of electronic, shoegazy kind of thing. This is called Rest Proof Clockwork from Played on the Warp label. Those are the CDs which I picked up at the fair. Didn't pick up any vinyl, but I found, in particular these Throbbing Gristle and Einsters and Annoyed. A lot of these, even on CD, these releases by these industrial groups can be quite hard to find. And when you do come across them in a while, they tend to be very expensive. But I got these for a really good price, actually, from this seller. Okay, so 22 minutes. I better leave it at that. I'm recording now on Monday, but I'll probably release this. I'll probably put this up later in the week. So until then, everybody, take care.